Hi everyone, I am Jyoti from Test Automation Competency. I'll walk you through the topic contract testing in today's session. So these are the knowledge etiquettes one should supposed to follow. Punctuality, please join the session 5 minutes prior to the session start time. Feedback, make sure to submit a constructive feedback. Silent mode, keep your mobile devices in silent mode and feel free to move out of the session in case you need to attend any urgent call and avoid disturbance. So these are the topic that we are gonna cover in today's session. Introduction, the need for contract testing in microservices, benefit of Pact and its core concept, how it works, its integration with CI/CD tools, common use cases for Pact in microservice architecture, installation configuration, configuring Pact for consumer and provider test, writing Pact contracts for API services, running Pact test and validating contract agreement and references. So starting with the introduction, contract testing is a type of software testing used to ensure that the interaction between different services or component in a system comply with predefined expectation or contracts. It verify that the contract specification of the interface between consumer and provider services is honored during communication. It is a crucial aspect of microservice architecture, ensuring that different services can communicate and interact as expected. It primarily focuses on testing the interactions and agreement, which we can call contracts, between different services, especially in system with multiple independent component. The Pact tool is a consumer-driven contract testing tool commonly used in the context of microservice services and distributed system to ensure that the interaction between different services are reliable and meet agreed expectation. It is particularly useful in system where services are owned and developed by different teams, which can lead to communication issues if not carefully managed. The need for contract testing in microservices. So here are certain points. Independent service development. So we need contract testing for independent service development. So the challenge was, so generally in microservices environment, team often work on different services that evolve independently, which can lead to mismatched expectation between services, especially when API changes over time. So at that point of time, we can use contract testing. So contract testing ensure that the services adhere to agreed upon expectations, which is contracts for their interaction, preventing issues when service evolve independently. Second one is preventing integration failure. So at that time also we can use contract testing. So the challenge was microservice needs to integrate seamlessly, but if one service changes its API, so it can break the integration of other services as well. So at that time we can use contract testing, which verifies that changes made by one services, the provider, sit aligned with the expectation defined by the other services, which is the consumer, preventing the integration failures. Third one is continuous development and rapid iteration. So here also we can use contract testing. So in microservice architecture, which often rely on continuous deployment and rapid iteration, in such environment, it is very important to catch the breaks changes before they reach the production. So at that time we can use this. Contract testing automates the verification of service interactions, ensuring that breaking changes are detected as early as possible in the development cycle, thus supporting continuous deployment, reducing the need for end-to-end testing. Here also we can use contract testing. So in traditional integration approach, where testing often involve running full end-to-end test for all the services, which is very time consuming and costly as well. At that point we can use contract testing, which focus on verifying the interaction between consumer and provider services that enables testing of each service in isolation, which also reduce the need of expensive and time consumption to end-to-end tests. Benefit of Pact and its core concepts. So here are a few benefits. First one is consumer driven contract testing. So the benefit of this is Pact empower consumer to define their own expectations, which drive the development of the provider's API. So the customer need to prioritize the prioritize and reduce the chances of miscommunication or unmet requirement. So the core concept of this is the consumer defines the contract, which is request format, response structure, and the provider used to validate it. This shifts the responsibility of service interaction to the consumer side. Second one is earlier detection of integration issues. The benefit of this is Pact help detecting potential issues as early as possible by testing the contract which is there between the consumer and provider services before they are even integrated. This reduces the likelihood of costly failures in the production. Core concept is that Pact verification steps ensures that the provider can meet the expectation set by the consumer, catching integration issues in the early stages. Decoupling of consumer and provider development. So benefit of this is Pact allow independent development of consumer and provider services by enabling each team to work on their own services without getting tightly coupled. This promotes parallel development as well as faster iteration cycles. Core concept of this is consumer and provider team can work independently with the contract acting as only point of integration. Next one is continuous integration and delivery support. The benefit of this is Pact integrates seamlessly into CI/CD pipeline, which ensures that consumer and provider interactions are validated continuously. This also allows for early feedback and ensure that breaking changes are caught before deployment. Core concept is that Pact contracts can be verified automatically within the CI/CD process, and which makes it easier to maintain the capability across services and prevent regressions. Next one is mock servers for independent testing. So Pact also provide mock servers that simulate the behavior of a provider, which also allow consumer to test their expectations without the requiring the provider services to be fully implemented or available. The core concept of this is Pact mock servers let the consumer to test the contract independent of the provider, facilitating parallel development and testing. How Pact work? So, Pact is a consumer driven contract testing tool used to ensure that interaction between different services in a microservice architecture are reliable and meet expectation. A contract defines the expectation between two parties, in this case, between a consumer services, the service making request, and a provider service, the service responding to request. With Pact, the consumer defines the contract. This means that the consumer specifies what kind of request it will send and what responses it expects to receive. The provider on the other hand must verify that it can handle the consumer request and return the expected response. The consumer runs these tests and Pact generates a contract file which is called Pact file that describes the expected intentions. This contract is stored and shared with the provider. Provider verifies the contract. Next, the provider retrieves the contract and run its own test to verify that it can fulfill the consumer expectation or not. The provider tests whether it can return the correct response in the expected format when it receives the specified format request from the consumer. If the provider passes the verification test, it means the provider can correctly respond to the consumer's request as described in the contract. Integrate Pact with CI/CD. So integrating Pact with your CI/CD pipeline ensures that contract testing is automated, making sure that the interaction between services stay compatible as they evolve. The core idea is to run Pact test continuously throughout the development lifecycle, ensuring early detection of integration issues. When a change is made to the consumer service, the CI pipeline runs contract tests defined by the consumer. These tests specify the expectation for the provider's responses. So if the consumer expectation don't match the provider's behavior, the test will fail, alerting the team to fix the issue. This integration prevent issue when a change in the consumer service could unexpectedly break communication with the provider. And on the provider side, after updates or deployments, the provider CI pipeline automatically verifies that it can still meet the expectation outlined in the consumer contract. This verification ensure that the provider continues to handle requests as expected, even as both services evolve independently. When the provider verifies the contract successfully, it confirms compatibility with the latest version of the consumer. And by integrating Pact into CI/CD pipelines, you automate the entire process. The pipeline runs test for the consumer, publishes contract to the broker, run provider verification, and proceed to deployment only if everything is compatible. This automation helps catch integration issues early, providing faster feedback, improving service reliability, and ensuring smooth deployment. CI/CD tools like Jenkins, GitLab, or Circle CI can all be configured to integrate Pact seamlessly into your workflow. Common use cases for Pact in microservice architecture. So these are few common use cases. Consumer driven contract testing, consumer defined expectations for API interaction, and Pact ensures that provider meet the expectation before deploying changes. So use cases: when a consumer service is built, Pact ensures the provider will support the required API calls and data formats. Provider verification. The provider verify if it can fulfill the consumer contract. It ensures the provider's API meet the agreed upon contract. Use cases: a provider service must be verified that its API response align with the consumer expectations and preventing breaking changes from reaching production. Next one is breaking change detection. Pact also help identifying breaking changes between consumer and provider services early in the development. So use cases: if a provider make a changes that breaks the existing contract, Pact will flag it and before the deployment, preventing it integration issues. Installing and configuring Pact for consumer and provider test. So we have used JavaScript for the programming language and Visual Studio Code for the IDE. We have used a dummy API to save the trouble of creating the API from scratch, and imported the same in the project in Visual Studio Code and set up the pack to run the test cases. So here we have created a folder called test and a folder inside that called contract. Created three more folder inside contract, consumer and provider, and outside contract there is a folder helper. So in this project we will use JavaScript to build the test on top of simple API. The provider logic of this project is implemented in this provider.js. The provider is capable of making calls to the server as well as retrieving a collection of active clients using simple fixed endpoint. Client can be searched by ID and basic validation. Client can be searched by the ID and basic validations is also performed. And consumer logic is implemented in consumer.js. So this logic enables consumer to reach the provider, get client, stores the result of a function expression connecting to the endpoint on the server side, while post client is used to create the client. Client data is contained in client data.json, which serves as a data store. Retrieved and transmitted clients are expected to conform to this data format. So run the provider services to verify that if the API is working or not. So from the terminal, we can run the following command, npm run provider, to check if our API is working. So it is up and working in this, so we can check through Postman. So here are two requests that I have made, get and post. So we can make a get call and we can send it, and we can see we are getting the information of all the clients with the first name, last name, age and ID. We can also give the ID, search the client by ID, and here it is. For the post call, in the body we are giving first name, last name and age, and here we are getting the response. We can try removing the first name. So here we are getting a message that the first name is missing, so which was mentioned here if first name is not available. And for, yeah, so our API is working fine now. So back in the project, we have created our first helper inside this helper folder. It is pact setup.js. So the first two lines of this file define the pact provider on the consumer side. The consumer will use this information to create the provider mock and subsequent contract as well. After port information is defined, various option uh, for the packed provider mock are set via new instance of packed. Logging path will be automatically created on text execution. Spec is simply specification of packed for other languages and is a part of contract structure. JVM uses the value of 3, and while for all other languages it is 2. A value of overwrite for packed write mode will override and truncate the existing packed file on each text execution, and while the value of update will append to the packed file. This is the name of the consumer, this is the name of the provider. So we have also created another file, wrapper file, pack test wrapper inside helper only, where we have used Jasmine to set the timeout. And the infrastructure of this code here simply sets up the provider prior to the test execution and closes the provider mock afterwards. Also, we have made some changes to package.json. So inside of this script node, created two new string, test consumer and test provider. The first value maps to the consumer test and contract creation scripting, while the second value maps to the contract verification scripting. Run in band ensure the execution will take place in sequence. For test provider, the setup file parameter is not needed in this example since the provider will simply be executed. Writing pact contract for API services. So we have created the contract. Sorry, yes, here in contract consumer folder by the name client consumer.spec.js. We require the libraries. So we need to define the matches to create the assertion. Import the consumer function that will be used for test creation. For this example, we will use the get client and post client. Two scenarios will be created, one to get the client and another to post the client. So the describe call will contain the get client and post client test. Create the constant get expected body which contains the body that we expect to receive after we send the request. In this example, the expected body after sending get client is a first name, last name, name and age, ID and ID. The interaction consists of the request that will be sent to the mock provider. Pact will receive these requests and validate them according to the expectation defined in the contract. This contract can then be uh, used to verify that everything is okay on the provider side as well. Now we'll update the body. So the following line ensures that any error occurring from the interaction registered with Pact will be logged and test will fail. Basically, this is where the tech Pact verify the interaction we are sending. Now we are going to create get client test in before each block. It is a place where we set everything that is required to initiate the interaction. So state is simply the state of the scenario before running the test. Upon receiving is a description of the request to get our client. With request is the request parameter. Method specifies the action, example post or get. Path path is the, in this case is clients. In this scenario testing get clients, we don't need to send the body, only the method, path and header. Will response which specifies what we expect to receive back from the server. We expect to receive a status code of 200 and this specified headers. The expected body will also be set using the previously defined constant get expected body. Now we need to add this interaction after creating the scenarios using this return provider dot add interaction. So this call registers expectations, request and essentially everything that needs to be verified for this scenarios. Once the get client response is received, the same function we are using on the customer side will make a request to the real provider. We receive the response and then perform the assertion based on the expectation for the response header and body. So we are going to check the response data is equal to the body that we expect to receive from the source. We also expect to receive a status score of 200. So we are checking it in here. So this were all about the get call. This is assertion for the post one. We are doing the almost same thing, creating a constant initializing first name, last name and age, and creating one more constant post expected body is what we are expecting from the call, and initializing it to the constant post body of first name, last name and age. In after each, we are doing the same verifications, and in before each, we are setting some value state upon receiving. And here we have in method we have added post we has added this path, and with the will response with the status is 200. That this is what we are expecting. And this time we have used matches. So matcher is going to use with the post expected body that we have declared at the beginning. So this was all about the post call. For the provider verifier, we have created this provider verifier in provider folder with the name client provider.spec.js. So the next line gets the contract from the Pact broker and verify whether or not the contract is following the expectation. This line imports the server as well as the data. We can create the server with the existing JSON file also. The server does not require importing anything related to the consumer, so we simply need to run the real servers and then run the contract against it. Here we are listening to the server on the specified port, then import and inject the data. We need to create the test itself. So so we have added this describe block for performing verification and validation. So we need to send the options. So provider will be the name of the provider. Log level is the log level. Provider base URL is the server URL. Pact URL is the pact location. So we have added version tags. In this it is dev. Finally, return the verifier. So we have create a new instance and pass the options as an argument and then call the verify provider function. This is going to verify the contract and check if the provider is following the expectations stated in the contract or not. So this was about provider verifier. Running Pact test and validating contract agreement. So we can go ahead and run the consumer and provider test. So to run that, we can go to terminal and run the following command: npm run test consumer and npm run test provider. So here we'll make the get call first. We'll run the consumer and we can see we are getting the expected body, header and status code. To get the fresh contract, we can run the npm run test provider. So it is passed. We can see the newly created contract in Pact folder by this name, where it is making get call, and in response we are getting the body, first name, last name, ID and age. So this is the new contract. We'll go again here and we'll make the post call now. We'll run the command npm run test consumer and it will make the post call, and we are expecting the correct status code, header and body. Now we will, to get the fresh contract, will again run the provider in the same file. We can go and see the newly created contract, which is by this method post. So that's how we can do this. And okay, so these are the references, and that's all for like today's session. Does anyone have any questions?
Anybody has any questions? Maybe yes, no. Okay, that will take it as a no, no doubts then. Well, Jyoti, it was a great session indeed. Thank you so much for doing it so well. And and if at all anybody has any questions in future, Jyoti would be happy to help you all.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sonali. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone for attending this
Thank you
session.
everyone for joining in. Thanks.